Hello everyone, and welcome to Ready to Race, where we run and talk everything racing. I'm Martise Moore, your Run Faster coach, and today I have the honor of running and talking with Dr. Emily Noble. Dr. Noble has a PhD in nutrition, and so she's going to tell us about how we can run, race, and balance nutrition all at the same time for optimal performance, because apparently it's possible. And while we're running, I encourage you all to send us questions so Dr. Noble can answer them on the spot. We want to use her for as long as we have her, so let's get running.
Yes.
Okay, so Dr. Noble, fueling for races is like a big topic for racers. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in this area?
Well, so I'm actually a proponent of, everybody has to be their own scientist when it comes to fueling, because what works for me doesn't necessarily work for some of my friends. For me, I have a very sensitive stomach, so I've learned that I need to eat 2.5 to 3 hours before I start running. And if I'm going to race hard, it might even be a little earlier, like 3 hours. I'll eat something that has carbohydrates, protein, usually like peanut butter toast.
Okay.
And also sweet potatoes. I love sweet potatoes for energy. You get a lot of good vitamin A in them. In addition to glucose, which is really going to be your fuel if you want to get speed.
Okay.
So it's going to depend on the length of your run, the length of your race. If it's longer than, I would say, an hour and a half, or even an hour, you might want to bring some fuel with you on the run.
Okay.
Usually, you can try the gels, shot blocks, goo, the goo gels.
What's your favorite flavor?
Well, I actually like, what works for my stomach are the shot blocks.
Okay.
So those are kind of like gummy candies. I like the ones with caffeine in them.
Okay.
Caffeine does, like if I'm racing anyway, actually does help give you a little bit of a boost.
Okay, tell us about some of the races that you run and that you're fueling for.
Well, I do marathons, half marathons, 10K.
She's really fast too, guys.
Once in a while, 5K. I just signed up for the Bulldog 50K, which is my first ultra.
Nice.
I'm really excited about that. What I will tell you, recovery is really important for nutrition. You want to try to eat basically within the first hour when you get back in, if your stomach will allow. Let's go. If your stomach will allow. And one of my favorite things, because it's both hydrating and it will replenish carbohydrate, and I love to make like a rice pudding with almond milk. I know it kind of sounds weird, but it's delicious.
Oh, nice. What does that do for you?
It just helps you to replace that glycogen, and also it hydrates you. If I go for a long run on a really hot day like today, and I'm sweating a lot, I find that corn chips or something that is salty plus has a lot of, so corn has a lot of glucose in it.
Okay.
Something like that really helps me kind of bounce back. Sometimes I'll come in from a long run if it's a hot day and I'm just like, oh, I have to lie on the couch and I just cannot get moving again. And I'll have some corn chips and it's like almost,
really?
Scooby snacks.
Really? So that's a good
Instant
excuse to use corn chips when you're on the couch. Corn chips get you off the couch.
I mean like tortilla chips,
Right.
But,
tell us a little bit about what do you mean by glycogen? Everybody's heard the term, but how does that affect you specifically when it comes to your runs? Like, for instance, we talk about glycogen depletion when we first start running and how that's going to happen. So can you talk about how food or fueling properly actually makes that process, go smoother?
Well, what glycogen is it's basically, you've heard of glucose. Glucose is 1/2 of table sugar. So table sugar is made up of glucose and fructose.
Okay.
Glucose is 1/2. And glucose is the preferred fuel source for the brain, your muscles. If you're trying to run fast, you're going to be burning through glucose.
Okay.
And your body stores glucose in something called glycogen. And glycogen is basically a chain, like a necklace of glucose, all stuck together. And it's in your muscles, it's in your liver, it's in your brain. And when you run out of sugar, your body will cut up that glycogen and use that for energy, as well as use your fat stores.
Okay. People like that.
The thing to know about glycogen is glycogen carries with it a lot of water. So part of the reason why we store fat is because to store everything, all the excess energy is glycogen. It would make you so heavy that you could barely move because with all that sugar it carries water. So sometimes people go on low carbohydrate diets and they might find they lose a ton of weight right away. Well, that's because they're not storing as much water.
Right.
And the same thing, the opposite, for when you're right before a race, you may be carbo loading and you feel slow and sluggish and so heavy and you're like, I'm gaining weight and I don't understand. You might start to panic. Don't panic. Your body is just retaining water from the glycogen, and that glycogen is going to help you. When the adrenaline from the race kicks in, you're not going to feel sluggish and slow. Every time. I always think right before a race, I don't even know how I can run 3 miles, let alone a marathon right now.
Right.
The body slows down when you're tapering and you start to feel all the little aches and pains. The second I get to the starting line, all that goes away.
Right. You know, you mentioned about people who are kind of trying to do different diets. What is your advice about that when you're training for a race, especially when you're getting close to your race? Do you want to try a new diet, or is that something?
No.
How far out should you try something new?
Well, as a person who has experimented with everything, I like to experiment with fats. Mostly as a scientist, I'm interested in these things. So I will say I do not recommend trying a new diet right before a race.
Okay.
Also, right before a race is not a time to be focusing on weight loss. Weight loss is something that you maybe want to focus on during the off season. Right before a race, I'm going to focus on just sticking with what you know that works.
Okay.
Don't panic and try something different on the day of the race. Just stick with what you know that works.
What can happen if you do try something new on the day of the race?
Well,
especially like sometimes they give you stuff at the race that you've never had before. What's some of the dangers?
Well, I don't want to go into graphic details here, but you're might have some gastric distress for sure. Sometimes it's like, and just regret, you know.
Sure.
And it's no fun to be. A marathon is already, or a race, any race. It's already hard enough. I remember I tried Powerade for the first time. One of my first races, and there's just too much sugar in there for me.
Okay.
So instantly my stomach felt awful, and I just regret it. I spent at least 2 miles just kicking myself for taking it. And that wasn't, I mean, that's not fun.
Right.
So I say just practice in your training, fueling with what you're going to use during the run. If you're doing a short race, you probably don't need, you don't need gels or goos or anything for races that are shorter than an hour. Most people don't. You may be somebody who has special, hypoglycemia or something like that, where you do want to carry something with you. But most of us, we don't need to be carbo loading for the 5K.
Okay, so
also, I will say one more thing about carbo loading, which is most people don't realize that it doesn't actually take that much to top off your glycogen stores.
Okay.
One caramel latte and a bagel from a coffee shop pretty much will top it all off. So when we talk about carbo loading, it doesn't mean like binging on, pasta and treats. It just means focusing on getting a little bit more of your calories from sort of carbohydrates and a little bit than you maybe normally would.
Okay, but in terms of, that's a good point that you're bringing up, because all of us are trained to think about carbo loading the night before a race. So what might be the ideal meal before any race, really? You need energy for all the races. Yeah. So what might be a good meal that you would have?
Well, again, it sort of depends on what you're used to. Like for me, I would want to have something that has, you know, some rice, some brown rice. Because rice I find is a little bit gentler on my tummy.
Sure.
I get nervous before a race.
Sure.
So I would have, like, you know, some brown rice, maybe some vegetables, or maybe I would have squash, or spaghetti squash, or sweet potatoes, something like that, and maybe a little bit of protein.
Okay.
Salmon, or, you know, whatever you like.
So you stay away from the pasta?
I do, but that's just me.
Okay.
But, however, I will say that if you're not used to eating foods that have a lot of complex fiber and things in them, like brown rice, or, you know, stick with what you know, like the white rice. And then for the next race,
Right.
if you think it might be a good idea, and I would recommend going toward the complex carbohydrates, because there's an awful lot of research showing that you can get tremendous benefits from that.
And tell us what a complex carbohydrate is. What's the difference between a simple and...
Oh, brown rice instead of white rice.
Okay.
Or, you know, whole grain. And not just the stuff on the label that says, like, maybe it's whole grains. Like, you need to see the grains in there.
Okay.
You know, there's a ton of grains out there that are complex.
Sure.
I tend to steer towards some of the, like, squash, sweet potatoes, vegetables, and then, you know, but again, life is supposed to be fun, so, you know, have the occasional pizza or whatever.
Sure.
And don't feel guilty about it.
Right, exactly. That's important. I wanted to hear that.
Yes.
So, okay, so a lot of us are busy. Like, you have a full-time job, right? Doing your PhD stuff.
Yeah.
And so the rest of us are busy too. How do you make that balance? Because, you know, it takes time to eat healthy, or is that a myth?
Well, personally, I think it takes a little bit of knowledge or a little bit of technique, skill. And then, I mean, some of the fastest things to cook are vegetables.
Okay.
You know? So it doesn't have to take time. It does take planning.
Okay. How would you cook some vegetables? Like, if I had 15 minutes, what could I make that's going to help give me optimal performance for my next training run?
Okay, well, a lot of people don't know this, but you can actually really easily microwave. That's easy.
Okay.
Spaghetti squash.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it cooks perfectly in the microwave. So you just get a spaghetti squash, poke a bunch of holes in it, throw it in the microwave, 10 minutes, done. In the meantime, if you're a person who eats meat, you could make, let's see, I have a 15-minute limit. Okay. I was gonna say you could cook up some chicken.
Okay.
If you have any chicken in your fridge. Or if you don't even need the chicken. You could throw some beans.
Okay.
Black beans.
Okay, good.
On top of the squash. So once it's out of the microwave, scoop out the seeds. Take a fork and get out the squash. And then you can throw in a little bit of olive oil, some salt. Olive oil is very good for you.
It's a fat, right?
It's a fat. It has vitamin E. It's an oil, technically. It has vitamin E. And it doesn't behave like other vegetable oils. It's actually a very healthy oil. Some fresh herbs. Really easy. Whatever you like, rosemary, basil.
Oh, I love rosemary.
Mix it on top. You know, put the beans. Heat up the beans. Or you can do it with tomato sauce.
Oh yeah, yum.
Spaghetti squash is very good. But you know, I would do spaghetti squash. I would do, let's see, last night I made asparagus soup.
Oh, yum.
Really easy. Take some asparagus, a little bit of oil, some garlic, throw it in a pan. Take that whole mixture, put it in a blender, blend it up. You can use water, you don't even need, I mean, it's completely rich and filling, low calorie, delicious.
Right.
There's a lot of potassium in it.
Yeah, why is potassium important? That's a good point.
It's one of your electrolytes. So sodium and potassium, they're electrolytes that all of the cells in your body use sodium and potassium flow or flux to communicate. So your getting electrolytes is incredibly important. But I would say potassium, if you eat it from food, you're going to be pretty much safe. But, sorry.
Don't want to get in my car.
If you eat it in food, you're pretty much safe. I wouldn't go out and say, oh, I need electrolytes, and then take a whole bunch of potassium pills. That would not be recommended.
Sure. Does it help for preventing cramps too? Like,
people have said that. I think it's mostly anecdotal, but people have said that. I'm not. Maybe there's research on it that I'm not familiar with.
Okay.
But yeah, but bananas. You know, people think, oh, bananas potassium is going to be good for cramping during running. Actually, probably it's more likely the glucose that's in the bananas that's giving you a little bit of relief when you're in the bump. It's really interesting. Like, your brain actually fatigues before your body really is fatigued.
Sure.
So when you're hitting the wall and you feel like there's so much pain and cramping, and a lot of that is your brain hitting a wall. And you can really help that with just a little boost of glucose.
Okay. That's great information. So
you're going to get all kinds of angry emails from paleo enthusiasts. And I have nothing. And I want to say also about diets. Those diets like that can work really well for people, especially people who, commit to them and wholeheartedly stick to them.
Sure.
It's been shown that they've tested low-fat diet, paleo diet, Ornish diet, all these different diets. They all work about equally as well, provided people stick to them. So if you believe wholeheartedly this is the best way to eat, and you stick to it, it's probably going to have benefit for you, but it doesn't mean that everybody else is wrong.
Sure. And like you said, at the end of the day, it comes down to your own personal experimentation.
Right.
Dr. Noble's just telling you how it's important to get certain nutrients that your body's going to need and look for during your race. Because what are some of the side effects of having poor nutrition habits when you're training and racing?
You can just get really lethargic, fatigue, you hit the wall a little bit earlier. I mean,
you have gas problems.
You have gas problems. You may be less motivated to actually get out and run.
Right, that's really important, because sometimes you feel sluggish and you're like, well, I worked all day. And it might have been what you ate.
Yeah. And usually, and it goes hand in hand. Like, it's important to eat well, but it's equally important to train well.
Sure.
So, you need to have those things sort of dialed in during your training as well as during a race, not just like, oh, I'm gonna eat better now and my race is in a week. Because you have to teach your body how to use those nutrients and how to work.
That's a great point, because that's what training is all about, teaching your body the muscle memory. So you're also teaching your fueling system
and your intestinal tract. I mean, it's just like any other muscle. It's gonna adapt to what you give it. Yeah. So you want to give it good, clean fuel from the beginning, not just throw it in at the end.
Sure. Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much for running and talking with me and giving us all this great advice. Do you have one piece of advice for someone who is just getting into racing, actually going to do their first marathon? And marathons fueling becomes a really big issue during them. What's one piece of advice you would give to that person from a nutrition standpoint?
I would say train your body to accept good nutrition, like early on. Teach every long run that you have. Act like it's a practice race. Okay. So give it what you're going to give it on the day of your race, and don't deviate from that.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That was really great advice. So hopefully you guys are listening and you're going to implement some of the strategies that Dr. Noble gave us. And if you have any other questions regarding nutrition or getting ready for your race in general, please contact me at ReadyToRace.com, or actually ReadyToRace.run. And until then, keep running, everybody.